Hey guys, I got a great question into the email account yesterday and I wanted to share it with you because it's awesome and I think a lot of people will be able to relate to it. So the question was, why can't my partner call their trauma trauma? So we're thinking here about why we minimize trauma, and it's relevant to most of us personally, not just the people in our lives, but to us. Why can't we call it trauma? A lot of people can relate to that. Why did it take me 10 years to call it trauma? Why did I minimize it? So really, I think it boils down to three things. So it's to do with avoidance, it's to do with lack of validation at the time, and it's to do with shame. And those three things are interlinked, but I'm going to take them separately. So if we think about that first issue of avoidance, the truth is no one wants trauma. Even though it's human, it's part of being human, even though it's a protective reaction, even though we all have experienced trauma in one way or another, even though we all carry trauma in one way or another, no one wants it. So we avoid it, and in doing so, in avoiding the truth of it, in avoiding calling it trauma, we also avoid the pain, all the feelings, the uncomfortable, difficult feelings attached to that truth. So that top level is about avoidance. Okay, underneath that, I would say it's to do with validation or lack of validation. So very, very often, the things that we can't call trauma ourselves are things that weren't called trauma at the time. So say you experienced something in childhood, what I would argue is if you can't call it trauma now, it's highly likely that at the time nobody called it trauma, nobody acknowledged that you were having a traumatic reaction. Nobody called it a traumatic experience. Nobody, and therefore nobody validated your feelings. You would have been having these kind of really intense reactions and nobody validated them. Nobody called it trauma. So that's the second thing. And then underneath that, it's really to do with shame. And if we think about that issue of validation, what goes on when that happens? So say the people around us didn't call it trauma at the time. People didn't acknowledge the reaction that we were having. People didn't acknowledge our feelings, our fear, how threatened we felt. The truth is, and I'm really thinking about childhood here, what happens is if we don't validate a child's feelings and experience, they internalize, right? So they internalize the experience, and by that I mean they blame themselves. So lack of validation of an experience that would have been so overwhelming for us, whether it was a big kind of severe experience or whether it was a kind of more commonplace everyday experience. Either way, they can both lead to a traumatic reaction, especially in a child. If that experience wasn't validated, if our feelings weren't validated, if no one said, or no one made you feel like you were seen and heard and understood, what we do is, because we're looking for reasons, we're looking for answers to explain it, we look inwards and we blame ourselves because we're feeling these intense fear, say, or intense anger. Why am I feeling it? What's happening? So there must be something wrong with me. That's what we say. That's the message. If no one around us is saying, I get it, I see it, this is why, or not even necessarily this is why, but just acknowledging that there was a difficult experience and this is how you're feeling, which allows us to put them together. We look inwards and we blame ourselves. And that's just the beginning of that slow drip, 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 drip of kind of lack of self-worth, and the development of a shame-based identity. So why can't we call our trauma when we're an adult, when we're standing, strong, when we're 25, 35, 45, 55, whatever? I would argue that very often it's because we carry shame around those experiences. And it might be to do with shame of an aspect of the experience itself, but it might also be to do with, no one having validated us and our feelings at the time. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Thanks.